Well, this is a glimpse of the roadmap we will discuss, and this is what the life of a backend developer literally looks like.
Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Code with Ease by Varsha. As many of you got a glimpse of the roadmap that we'll be talking about today. Why do I call this the ultimate backend developer roadmap? Is basically because of two reasons. One is we're already doing a playlist on tricky backend developer review questions, in which I have tried to curate the questions not just on Java and Spring Boot but across the entire stack of backend developers across the entire stack that every backend developer needs to know. And secondly, I'm having 7 years of experience as of today, and I've got my hands dirty with most of the stack that again I'll be talking about today. So who are going to benefit from this video is, if you're an aspiring backend developer preparing for an interview, then this video is a must watch. Even if you're not preparing for an interview but you want to level up and become like a better backend developer, you can watch this roadmap video to fill in the knowledge gaps and try to work upon those. So this is going to be giving you a solid self-study plan on the topics that you need to cover also. So on that note, let's begin.
So let's begin. The first thing which you need to know before the first pillar which you have to fulfill if you want to become a backend developer is the knowledge of at least one programming language and the related framework. So for example, I am a Java developer. So along with Java, I also need to know about Spring framework. And that is what is going to complete me in terms of my programming language and framework as a Java backend developer. I can call myself a Java backend developer, not only because I know Java, but I also have to know about Spring Boot. Similarly, it can be like if you want to become, let's say, a Python backend developer, you need to know about Django, right? You need to be aware of the MERN stack if you want to be a JavaScript backend developer. Apart from that, you have to be strong in the CS fundamentals, which basically includes these three things. Of course, your data structures and algorithm, because when as a backend developer, you're writing the logic, you have to incorporate your data structure and algorithms along with the design patterns and the OOPS principles in case of object-oriented languages. The next thing which you have to be knowing is about the web fundamentals, very important. Mainly the networking, the protocols, and the data formats. In case of networking, if you do not even know how on call of a REST API, how is your data flowing from one machine to another machine? What is actually happening? The basics of networking has to be very easily understood. Otherwise, you will not be able to even work with the Linux commands when you're working on the servers. So the networking part is also very important. So you should know about DNS, TCP, IP, ports, and protocols. So this is a very small example of what you need to know about networking basics. There are a lot of different things, much more beyond this. But basically, you just have to know the jargons related to networking. The next thing which you need to be aware of is about the protocol, the HTTPS and the HTTP protocols, mainly because these are the protocols that we use when we are building our APIs. You have to know about these methods and the response or the status codes that we return. For example, when we are doing a post call, we usually return 201. Or when we are doing a get call, we usually return 200 OK. Now, if you are not passing the right authorization, we should be returning 401. So what code to return in what scenario? What is the significance of each of these methods? When to use a put, when to use a post? All of these things you should be aware of. Only then you'll be able to write good APIs. And of course, the request and response structures, your headers should be correct, your body, how you're forming the body, the way you're passing in the DTOs, what kind of handling you're doing to check if your DTO is valid, every field of the DTO is valid, the validation check. So all of that you have to understand. And the response structure should also be in a well-defined manner, where you should have some metadata about what is the status, what is the code, and the actual data. And lastly, under web fundamentals, we have these data formats. So JSON is the most heavily used data interchange format. Whenever we're writing REST APIs, we are accepting JSON in the response, and we are giving out also JSON in the we are accepting JSON in the request and giving out JSON in the response. Apart from that, we have XML and other protocols and other formats like YAML and protocol buffers also, or protobuf. So you got to have a high level overview of what are the existing data formats and what kind of library you should be using in order to incorporate those data formats in your code. For example, instead of JSON, you are not accepting a JSON, but let's say you're accepting an XML, or let's say you're accepting a file. So how should you tweak the code in order to do that? So now that is going to build the foundation of how you are now going to create the APIs. Before creating, these are the things which you have to do. The next is about version control. most of us we use Git, GitHub. There's also Bitbucket, SVN. So these are the tools that we use for checking in our code, committing our code, and finally that code gets pushed via CI/CD pipelines and gets deployed, right? And these are the best practices which I've documented over here. Day one, if you are a backend developer, at least, at the very least, have these best practices in the mind. Only then you'll be able to shine as a backend developer. Clear commit messages. Never directly write your code on the master branch. Make sure code reviews are happening usually via pull request. Then keeping your master branch stable, should only have the releasable code. Try to integrate your changes by doing reverse merge, by pulling it from the remote repositories. Use git ignore file if you're setting up a new repository. Use git ignore file to keep the extensions or the file extensions which you do not want to include as part of the build. And every commit should have logically a small subset of a change which you're pushing. Don't overload your commit with many different changes. So these are the very basics as a backend developer from day one. These are the very basics which you have to know. The next aspect is about databases, right? So of course, as a backend developer, our work is to write logic, business logic, and business logic is incomplete without interacting with our database. Now, when we talk of database, majorly there is a class, there's a differentiation between the type, SQL database, NoSQL database, and each have its own type. There is a whole lot of discussion in the system design videos where we talk about when to use what kind of a database. And let's say you are already landed into a team which already uses a NoSQL database. Now, when it is already using the NoSQL database, then you have to know more about using the NoSQL database and the how to deal with it, like the database, whatever the design principles and every strategies there. Now, overall, on a very overview, high level overview, you have to have a bit of proficiency in at least one SQL database and in at least another one more NoSQL database. Okay. Then you have to understand the basic design principles, optimization techniques, and how the data migration or replication backup. Why these points are necessary? Because these are something which you have to do it in production anyway. Okay, some data migration you have to know how it is working behind the scenes, and of course query optimization. These are needed a little bit ahead when you become senior and you have to write performant code. So in those scenarios you'll have to know this. But a very brief overview of at least one SQL data type, a database, and one NoSQL database is necessary. Then you should know what are the types of what. Like NoSQL has 4 different types. There can be columnar database, there can be key value pairs. So different types of NoSQL databases there. Similarly, under SQL, we have SQL Server, we have Oracle, MariaDB, Postgres, right? So you have to know at least which type falls under what. Then when to use which one. You have to also understand parsing or reading a ER or an entity relationship diagram. Usually this is taught in colleges also. Then writing about SQL queries. So I've just noted down all the things which you have to know, like in your tool set. What are the things which you have to have? You should know how to write basic SQL queries. Good to know how to work with indexes. Also, one more thing is good to know how to work with sequences, right? How to generate sequences. Then caching strategy, how to implement that. You should be, if you're working with SQL, asset properties are must. You should know about how to have transactions written like this, complying with the asset properties. And in case of Spring Boot, you should know about Hibernate, like that is the ORM framework, how it works internally, and all of those things. So these are the things which will cover 80 to 90% of the things. If you cover these portions, you will be good to go. You will be able to work with databases, at least not going into something very complex or intricate, but at least you'll be able to write good business logic. The next is about build tools. In Java, we have Maven, right? We have NPM in JavaScript, and we have pip in Python. Now, recently, I did a video as part of my Tricky Java Backend Developer series that I talked at length about the pom.xml file. So Maven is a build tool. It has several different commands. So you have to have an understanding of the pom file, the pom.xml that we have in Java. Take any pom.xml, download it anywhere from internet, and just read through it and try to understand what is doing what. Some things will be self-explanatory, but some things will be like you'll not be able to understand why is it written. What is the meaning of, let's say, plugin repositories, or what is the meaning of the settings.xml file? I have also talked about it in my video in many different questions, but this is a very important skill. how to work with your pom.xml, what to add in the XML, what to not add in the XML, what is the significance of everything that we write in the pom.xml. So that is going to give you a very good overall experience of how building of the project works, how the artifact is actually built and put into the target file. So that experience is very, very crucial as a backend developer. Otherwise, you'll not be able to handle the release and deployment of a project. Next is the containerization and orchestration. So all of us know industry-wide majorly used Docker and Kubernetes. Docker is going to help you in packaging the application as a Docker image, and then Kubernetes is going to manage all your Docker containers containing several different applications. So if not Kubernetes, at least write one simple hello world program, Dockerize it, push it to a Docker hub registry, okay, and then just play around with the Docker commands at least. And also, just as pom.xml is important, in my recent video I've also talked at length about the Docker file, what each line of the file means, how multi-stage builds happen. I've also talked about those. So we are done with the build tools and the containerization orchestration. Now about messaging and event streaming. So why do we need this? The reason why I need this is because we usually, that is a different type of an architecture, like the event driven architecture, right? We want things like we want asynchronous processing, we want event driven architecture. So for these kind of things, we use, like for cloud vendors, we have AWS Event Bridge, we have Kafka. So that is also a very crucial thing, because not everything you can process synchronously. And then you may also have to buy event-driven architectures, because you may have to respond to certain events, what is happening, like clickstream events, for example. So you have to understand what events are, what is a pub/sub model. So now this part is little bit inclined towards the system design aspects. Or I also have many different videos on system design in my channel. So this is more tilted towards system design aspect, because as a backend developer, apart from DSA, you have to go very heavy on the system designing part, at least on the building blocks of the system design. What is a load balancer, where are we using a caching, where do we need our message queues, right? So even event driven architecture and your messaging queues, all of this comes or falls under that aspect of this thing, that you have to be aware of this. You have to know at least how to work with a Kafka producer and a consumer, how to set it up in your Java Spring Boot application. I'm very soon going to put up a video on that, a very basic inventory management system. I'm working on that. So I'll very soon put a video for that as well. The next is about the API design. Like I said, that in order to write good APIs, first foundation is your web fundamentals is going to be strong. Then your design patterns, and that needs to be strong, right? But even before design patterns, one thing is about writing correct API request response, the validations, the DTOs, how you're forming, what kind of response entity you are enclosing in your object. So those things are important. So you should know API design principles. There's a whole lot of things. I have not done any video on my channel as of yet. I can do it. Let me know in the comments below if you want me to. Like correct way of developing RESTful APIs by following the REST principles, right? So which status code, the right status code to be returned everywhere, right? So all of this well-structured, well-documented APIs, which is something which will be like very easy to maintain. So writing that kind of API and maintaining a documentation, let's say on Swagger, is very important, along with the fact that you also have to have a good testing mechanism of your APIs, good validation, best practices. Your security is a very big aspect, right? That you're exposing an API, it should not be vulnerable to any kind of potential threats. So that part is important. So to be able to write secure APIs, to be able to write well-maintained, well-documented APIs is very important. That is like the bread and butter of a backend developer. So you have to know that thing very well. The next aspect is about CI/CD pipelines. Now your code is ready, your development is done. Now what? You have to create the CI/CD pipeline to ensure a smooth release and deployment. of the code. So for that, you have to understand how to integrate the CI/CD pipelines. A very common example is using Jenkins, right? We also use different tools. Maybe in AWS, we use code pipelines, right? So there are different CI/CD pipelines, but that is not the point. No matter what you use, the principles are the same. You code, you commit the code gets built, right? Using whatever build tool you have, it builds your artifact. After the artifact is built, before that, of course, the tests are run and everything. Then we get a coverage report. We also see bugs. If there are any security vulnerabilities, we get a report of all of that. The artifact is built. Once the artifact is built, then finally it is prepared for the deployment in wherever you are trying to deploy, the servers, the nodes. This is the typical flow of a CI/CD pipelines. Now that has to be set up. Once that is set up, then no matter how many times you write the code and commit it, automatically build gets triggered and the rest happens. So you have to understand the principles of what a CI/CD pipeline is. Where is Docker as a containerization technique fitting in terms of CI/CD pipeline? What are the tools? How does your version control? How does your Docker and how does your code, everything fit in this entire picture of a CI/CD pipeline? How your testing frameworks get affected. So all the things you have to keep in mind and understand it first, and then only you'll be able to write a CI/CD pipeline. This is also a very important role. Many teams, many companies have different teams for this ops, like DevOps guys who handle this. But you should have a knowledge, because you might have seen there's a Jenkins file that we have in our Maven projects. In that Jenkins file, we make it a point to ensure all the details that we need to pass in order to kickstart our CI/CD pipeline, right? So this is one important thing which you have to know. And coming to the next part, the unavoidable, right? The cloud platforms. So this is, just by knowing your Java and Spring Boot will not help you unless you have worked on some sort of some cloud platform. At least you should have knowledge about how do these platforms work, what are the different jargons that we use, and all of these things. I've just listed down all of the different things. Like I use heavily AWS, right? So Java plus Spring Boot plus AWS. This is my tech stack more or less. So if I do not have these three things along with my logging tools and all the things along with the tools which I just mentioned, I cannot call myself a proper backend developer. So these are something like it's inevitable. You have to know it. These are like indispensable. You have to know it. Finally, the architecture and principle wise, you have to understand the architecture of microservices. The reason I've included it at the last, because it just goes without saying, because if you're able to write a plain and simple code, but you're not following the right microservices, like controllers being separate, servers being separate, or having API gateways which should manage the communication, the right way of just architecting good microservices, having good separation of concern, coupling and cohesion, all of that, then you cannot say that you have built microservices. Otherwise it's going to be a monolith app. So that thing you have to understand. Finally, see, I've again included this at the end because it is of course a critical skill, but DevOps practices, it's good to know. It's always good to know the things what you have to implement in terms of the infrastructure as code, the ISC code which you have to know in order to write the CI/CD pipeline, the configuration management tools, the containerization. But even if you do not know them, just having a bird eye overview is also going to help you. But at least have some interest and curiosity to sit and learn about these. So with that, we are summing up the roadmap that I have created for you guys. Now, at any given day, this is what the life of a backend developer looks like, right? If you tell me to pick any top 5, I cannot. The reason I have given over here, when I'm building APIs, these are different things which I have to keep in mind. So many things go on in parallel. I have to keep in mind about the data structure, the design patterns, about the logging also, about the Docker file also, about secure coding also, about writing the right queries also. So many different things go inside the mind of a developer. You cannot miss one. You cannot say I was so busy in writing the unit test and the Docker file that I completely missed about writing the logging. I forgot to log to Kibana. You cannot say that. So that is the thing. That is how the life it is. The life. This is the roadmap, like I shared. This is how the life of a backend developer is. Not easy, But yeah, that is what it is. So the point of this video was to not overwhelm you guys with such a big roadmap. But if you see, it is not that big also. All you need to understand is to level up by block. Think of it every point as like a building block. You just try to build your skills one on top of another. It's not important for you from day one to have all the different things in the mind. Of course, it is not possible for any person. Over the years, gradually it will take time to build, but one day it will surely, that you'll be able to keep all the different things in your mind. It will become like a muscle memory, so you will be able to do it, of course. But first focus on the fundamentals, one thing at a time, programming language at a time, or framework at a time, or maybe let's say databases at a time. Do one thing at a time and be good at it. Try to understand it at length, what is happening behind, underlying, right? Then only you'll be able to build a solid base, and on top of that put all the blocks one by one, and you'll surely ace yourself as a backend developer. So don't worry guys, this roadmap, I am hoping it is going to give you some clear direction if you are trying to start out as a backend developer, or maybe if you already are, maybe to give you a roundup of what are the things, what are the gaps you need to fill in if you want to level up as a backend developer. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video, got some value out of it. If you have, please do like the video, share it among your friends and peers and colleagues, whoever might find it useful, and do let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you so much for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much again for watching.